Hello, my name's Colin McClellan and welcome to Britain's Best B Roads. Today we're going to be taking a road that's right on my doorstep, the A72 onto the A70. So you can leave the M74 either on junction 7 or junction 12 depending on whether you're coming from the north or the south, and take this lovely detour, stop off for a coffee, something to eat, see some historical things on the way, or just drive some lovely roads. And the car that we're going to do it in today is this. My 1988 Porsche 944S. I'll tell you a bit more about this car on the drive. Looks like the sun's coming out as well, so let's get going. Hello everyone. You joined me having just coming off the Larkhall junction of the M74. I've spared you the first part of that road because it's not particularly interesting, but now we're coming down to Garrion Bridge, and this is where the road starts to become very nice indeed. Apologies for the sunglasses, it is actually nice and bright and sunny here today in Scotland. So on this stretch of road, obviously let you see the road. We'll talk a bit about the car that we're in and how it's driving, how it feels to drive, how it compares to more modern cars. But also there's quite a lot of history along this road, and so I will point some of that out. We'll talk about it, and we'll even stop in a few places for a better look. So this is a double roundabout at Garrion Bridge, crossing the River Clyde, which is quite full because we've had a lot of rain. Talking about the history of this place, actually our first stop was pretty quick. There's a little place called Dalserf. It's not even a village, just a few houses. But there's an old church here, built in the early 17th century. Dalserf, Dal is a Gaelic word meaning a flat meadow next to water. Just this very much is. And Serf is thought to relate to Saint Serf, who, if my memory serves me right, was a 9th century saint. Now, Saint Serf's link to Dalserf, I'm not too sure about, to be honest. I don't know whether he lived here for a time and personally set this church up, or whether it was just dedicated to him. This was one of the churches used by the Covenanters in the 17th century. You can Google that if you want to find out more about it. And one of their lead supporters is buried in the churchyard here. But as I say, this church was built in the early 17th century, but there must have been a church earlier here on this site earlier than this, because, well, Saint Serf was from the 9th century, so that's quite a big gap. But also within the graveyard of Dalserf Church there is a 10th century Viking hogback grave stone mound, which is quite something indeed. Now, I have never actually seen this for myself, so we'll park up here and try and find it. Let's go and hunt for this Viking gravestone. So there it is, the 17th century church. Absolutely beautiful. I'm right at the main window of the church. There's the Viking oak stone grave. It's very narrow, quite small. An incredible thing. See how weathered it is. Okay, so that was fun to see something of such an age. Back to the car. So that was exciting, wasn't it? I've no idea why there's a 10th century Viking buried in a tiny little collection of houses in central Scotland, but there you are. some window down. What a beautiful place Dalsurf is. It's almost like a movie set. It's so incongruous to the surroundings really of the other villages round about here, but it is properly ancient. The history that's in here is incredible. Not somewhere I've spent much time about. It's a tricky bit to get out of, no? So bear with me while I try not to pull out in front of anybody. Go. And back onto the road. So a little bit about the car, quickly. So 1988 Porsche 944S, 2.5 litre 16 valve engine, gearbox at the back, engine mounted longitudinally at the front, gives really good weight distribution, almost 50-50. So the gearbox at the back is more technically referred to as the transaxle because the drive half shafts actually come out of the gearbox. The steering feel is really good. The steering is power steering, but it's not overly powered. It's obviously hydraulic steering, not electric, like you get in a lot of cars nowadays. So you really feel as if whatever inputs you give are driving, are turning the wheels. You can feel the tyres loading up. The lens cap just catching there. You can really feel it when the tyres load up as you go into the corner. You get plenty of warning if it's going to step out on you, but the reality is it doesn't have probably enough power to get yourself into a lot of trouble. When it was new, it had 190 brake horsepower. This car has been very well looked after, I think. 107,000 miles on it, but it's been very well looked after, so it feels like it's still got most of those horses left. But this car's not about flat out acceleration. Most modern cars would have this in a 0 to 60. You know, anything above a 1.6 or anything with some sort of forced induction will beat this car in acceleration, but it's the way this car feels to drive, the balance, the driving position that you have. You can't get driving position in modern cars that are like this because of the way cars have had to be designed for safety. So you really have to go back to cars of this era to have a drive that feels as involved, I think, as this. A bit more about the roads we're driving on here and the history around about it. So most of this area was at one time anyway the lands of Lee Estate, L-E-E Estate, which goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years. If you look at the coat of arms for Lee, or the family of the Lee, is called Lockhart, spelled L-O-C-K-A-R-T, and the coat of arms have on it a heart and a padlock. Now, the story goes that in the early 14th century, the second, I don't know what he would have been, a baron maybe, second baron of Lee, fought beside Robert the Bruce against the English, and then later on in the Crusades, after Robert the Bruce had died obviously, he took Robert the Bruce's heart in a locked casket on the Crusades with him, and he carried the key around his neck, and that's where that symbolism of Lockhart comes from. They actually lost Robert the Bruce's heart in Spain and had to recapture it, thankfully. That would have been a bit embarrassing if he'd come home without it. And that's part of the fame of the Lockhart family. The Lockhart family, I think their origins are in France, and the name Lockhart is actually Locard, L-O-C-A-R-D. There's a big French influence round about this area of the Clyde Valley. On the hill just on the opposite side of the Clyde is a little village called Nemfler, a fantastic vantage point, top of the hill looking up and down the valley. Nemfla, rumoured to have some sort of links to Knights Templar, hence the name Nemfla Knights Templar. I don't know anything about that. I don't think there's much evidence of it. Certainly the timings of the French influence here, and obviously the connection with the Lee, Lockhart and the Crusades all kind of vaguely ties in. I don't know if there's actually much of a connection. And then further up, more towards Tinto Hill, there's towns called Pitnane or Pitnane, Small Hill. So the French have definitely an influence here, and back about 5-6 miles is Châtellerault, Castlerault, part of Duke of Hamilton's hunting estate, as it was then. The gear change in this car is, the throw-in is probably a bit longer than you might imagine it to be. You can get short shift kits fitted to these cars, which I'm told make a big difference. I haven't driven one with it on it. This has just got the standard shift, although all the bushings have been tightened on it when it was getting its service in MOT a month ago, and it's made a huge difference. The gears they slot in beautifully and they hold in gear, don't pop out or anything like that. What I do notice is when you're changing down gear, it does help to try and rev match, give the throttle a little blip, and it goes in gear just a little bit more easily. I don't know whether that's just, this car's always been like that, or if it's the age with the synchro mesh just getting a little bit worn. But certainly a little heel toe or a little bit of rev matching, and it goes in beautifully. It's a lovely gearbox. Everything allows you to get the right timing when you get into corners, and get your braking, change down the gear. You never feel like, oh, I couldn't get the gear in and I've missed the braking and I've missed the apex of the corner. In this car, it always feels very easy to get yourself well set up for the corner, hit the apex, squeeze the power coming out of it. What you would notice driving this car compared to more modern cars is the way you have to be quite delicate on the accelerator, particularly coming off it. If you come off the accelerator too quickly, if you felt that there just now, did that on purpose obviously as an example, if you come off it too quickly, you do get a bit of a judder. Obviously it's a cable accelerator, not fly-by-wire you get in modern cars nowadays, so it's much less forgiving. So it revs up to 6,500. You never really feel the need to do that. You know, you get a nice boost of power up to, 4,500. Feels like a more natural place to change gear, but you'll go all the way to 6.5. So when you get onto the real twisty bits, as we will later on, you can keep it in gear and you've got plenty of range, and it pulls really nicely all the way from 1,500 up to really 5.5. You don't get an awful lot more power after 5,500 revs, but it'll go up to 6.5. Part of this, the reason I think this road is so good, is that it follows the River Clyde. You're following it back up towards its source. Well, we won't get near its source today, it's quite far out from here. So you're right along the side of the valley, River Clyde. You probably can't see it from camera shots just now, down on my left hand side, and the valley sloping up, really fertile land for orchards. The 944S, quite a rare car actually. Very, very brief history of how this car came to be. Porsche, Ferdinand Porsche designed the Volkswagen Beetle, evolved into designing the Porsche 356. That then evolved into the 911. Porsche were working with Volkswagen, Audi as it is now, to design a small sports car in the mould of Volkswagen, a small sports car that was accessible to the masses. Nice classic Alfa Romeo garage in there. So a car that could be bought by the masses. And then as it got closer towards its launch in the late 70s, Volkswagen Audi backed out with the oil crisis starting to pick up some heat. They thought that actually people don't want low slung sports cars, they want hot hatches, hence the Golf. So they backed out of it. Porsche had already felt invested quite a lot in it, so decided that they would just make it, and that was the Porsche 924. So 2 litre 8 valve engine in it. That was very successful for them, and so they beefed it up a little bit, gave it a bit more power, because that was really its downfall. The steering on it was nice, but the engine in it wasn't really a Porsche engine. So they beefed it up, put more power in it with a new engine, 2.5 litre 8 valve engine, which was a Porsche engine, and that gives the 944, which this is. But the only difference in this car, well, I say the only difference, actually there's quite a lot of differences as I found trying to get parts for them. Obviously the head's different, 16 valve head, anti-roll bars, thicker, some of the brake components are different, the suspension in the front is different. Instead of having the shock absorber screw into the strut sleeve, it is folded in at the top, which makes it a real pain to replace the shock absorbers in the front. Of these are actually better if you can just get a whole new strut, sleeve and shock absorber in one. So there's quite a lot of things in this car actually that are different and better, but they only made this car for around a year, and then moved very quickly onto the 944 S2, which has the 3 litre 16 valve engine and looks very different from the front. In particular, it's got the front valance of the 944 Turbo. So we're now in a little village called Kirkfield Bank. This road along the River Clyde is just littered with lots of these beautiful little villages. So Kirkfield Bank leads up into Lanark, and what I think is probably the best part of this road, the Kirkfield Bank Braes, or hills, as we call them in Scotland. We call them Braes in Scotland, but hills is what they actually mean. This is a lovely winding road. It's great fun to go up it and then back down. It's not very long, but good fun. And this, as I mentioned earlier about keeping the car in gear, this is where you'll get a chance to see that. So approach it with a bit of speed in third gear, because you want to keep that momentum going. As I say, it's not the quickest of gear changes, so you really need to keep that momentum going. Then down into third, little blip in the accelerator, and then we'll just keep it in second all the way. 4,000. The car really feels like it moves around you because of that perfect weight distribution, but also because you pretty much are in the middle of the car from a distance point of view as well. You really feel that the back end is moving round you in these corners. The steering's beautifully weighted, there's no flat spots or numbness. Not too quick. There we are, up into Lanark. The Royal Borough of Lanark, no less. So Lanark, another very historic town, has connections to William Wallace. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what those connections are. I think maybe something to do with he either got married here or his wife was from here, something like that. So this is not the worst history lessons you've ever had in your life. Hopefully just enough to pique your interest and make you look up Google, which is probably what I should have done before opening my mouth about some of these topics. With the church at the bottom of Lanark High Street, church at the bottom of Lanark High Street has a very nice statue to William Wallace in it, which is worth a few photos. The problem with these historic little towns though is that they weren't built with cars in mind. So So there are some pinch points where it would have been wide enough for maybe 2 horses and carts to pass, but not a bus and a truck. Lanark used to have a race course for horses. In fact, it is one of the oldest race courses in Britain. It certainly had the oldest race in Britain, the Lanark Silver Bell, which I think is now actually held at Hamilton Racecourse, because since the 70s Lanark Racecourse shut. But it goes back, I mean the Silver Bell race I think went back to the 10th and 11th century. This car is actually for sale. I've had it for 5 months. I'm just not driving it as much as I would like, and as rare as the Porsche 944 is, probably only 100 or so of them on the roads in the UK. I appear to have 2 of them, which is unnecessary, so one of them has to go. Actually, they'll probably both go. Time for something else. So this car's for sale. Passed its MOT first time about 11 months ago. As you can see and hear, it's driving great. The guy I bought it from drove it all the way up from the south of England up to me, because I couldn't get down to see him, so he drove it up all that way, and it never missed a beat. It's a great car, been very well looked after, as you can see. Been in the same family ownership before me for around 20 years. It was their pride and joy. It really is great to drive. You can tell the difference instantly between a car that has been well looked after during its life and one that hasn't. Not just cosmetically, but the interior, the way it drives. This has definitely been a well looked after one. I think that's the problem with a lot of 944s nowadays, is that there was a period of time where you could buy a 944 for not very much money at all, like probably even get one for high hundreds of pounds, certainly low thousands. And the problem with that is you got people who can afford to buy them but not maintain them properly, because these were, you know, they're not expensive cars to maintain, but you do need to look after them properly. And there's a lot of cars out there where the maintenance wasn't done properly on them, and they fall to pieces, and now they're really, really rough, or they're in the scrap heap. So there's not that many 944s going about, certainly not 944S going around, that are in anything like good condition. You know, even if the bodywork looks pretty good, it doesn't cost that much to get a respray. The underside might not be so great, but this one's in very good condition. Now, after a drive like we've just had, start to question why I would sell this car. Since I've had it, all I've done was give it another service, refurbished alloy wheels. They weren't bad, and again another sign that car's been well looked after. When the alloy wheels were stripped to be refurbished, the metal was still in great condition. The guy that was refurbishing them said to me before he did it, said the number of times he's done wheels on older cars, on older Porsches like these, and you strip them and it's like Swiss cheese. You know, it doesn't look like there's a lot of rust there, because in the past people sprayed over the wheels, and that was the risk that you take. But when he stripped this, the wheels on this, they were in great condition. So much so that the alloys now pretty much look almost like new. He did a great job. Having the passenger seat back recovered, just with the sunlight being on the fabric, it had started to disintegrate. So that was done, and again the guy's done a really great job. It's really sharp, and that's all the car's needed. I think I put a couple of wiper blades on, sort of service, replaced the plugs, the fluids, and it just drives great. You know, this is a car, and I don't think I'm going to get a chance to do it, but if you wanted to take this car on a road trip across Britain, even over into Europe, this would be a great fun car to do it in, because it's so well balanced. You know, the chassis is not too firm. If I put the car in the right gear when I'm going around it, the chassis is not too firm. The wheels that are on it are 15-inch alloys with the proper Maxim tyres that are on it, which are sometimes referred to as balloon tyres, because compared to the profile in modern tyres, it's a very high profile. The great thing about that on British roads in particular, they soak up all the bumps. Well, that's it, everybody. Thank you for watching this video. I've no experience of doing YouTube videos before, so any feedback or comments you have will be very well received. Love to hear them and get your advice on how we could make these videos even better. If you did like it, please do like. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe, because more will be on their way. And yeah, tell your friends. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.